Good morning, folks, and thank you very much for joining me this morning at this Beyond Plastics presentation. We're going to take a bit of a bird's eye view look at the global plastic crisis. Beyond Plastics is a nonprofit organization based at Bennington College in Vermont that is dedicated to ending the global plastics crisis. For folks that don't know me, my name is Dana Ripper. I'm coming to you right now from rural central Missouri. I am a wildlife ecologist by profession. You can see a picture there of my natural habitat. I like to get out and survey for birds and other wildlife. And like many folks in the wildlife ecology field, I worked all over the country before ultimately settling here in Missouri. And you can see some of the stars here are places that I worked over the years. And some of those places, such as southwestern Louisiana here and Prudhoe Bay, Alaska here, were places where I was able to see the sort of beginning of life, if you will, of plastic. Those are very heavy oil and gas extraction areas. So in 2010, I came here to Missouri and with Ethan Duke founded the Missouri River Bird Observatory in 2010. Our mission is the conservation of birds and really all wildlife via science, education, public outreach, and conservation policy advocacy. The Missouri River Bird Observatory is a Beyond Plastics affiliate, and I'm coming to you today as a volunteer speaker with the Beyond Plastics Speakers Bureau. So a lot of folks that I work with in plastic advocacy come to it from very different angles, some of them from the public health angle, because plastics are quite detrimental to human health, as we'll see briefly. Some folks from the pollution and waste management angle, and other folks from the fossil fuel angle. And we all kind of come together because this is a problem that affects all of us and all of the species with which we share this planet. So being a wildlife ecologist, ornithologist specifically, I came to it from the bird angle. We've all started seeing more and more pictures like this. They're becoming more pervasive and making everyone more aware of the problem. These are albatrosses on a very remote Pacific island, and you can see that they are living in plastic trash. These types of photos are also becoming more and more common. We know that birds are ingesting plastic pieces. They're mistaking them for their food items, such as small shrimp and other invertebrates. And there is now a great deal of documentation of birds trying to feed their young with our plastic waste. The National Wildlife Federation has a webpage devoted to this topic called A Plague of Plastics. And you can see there on the bottom at the caption, this albatross carcass was found on Midway Island, a remote Pacific island, where scientists estimate 99% of birds have some plastic in their stomachs. So all over the world, we have birds living in our garbage, living in our plastic waste. This is also true of all kinds of different wildlife species. This is a particularly famous photo, and I'm sorry to subject you to it and to leave it up there, but this is a sea turtle, of course, that was found by a research vessel, and it has a plastic straw in one of its nostrils. And the only positive thing about this situation is that this video of the researchers removing the plastic straw from the turtle's nostril went viral on YouTube and has more than 35 million views. And I think that it was one of the turning points where we really started getting a lot of public awareness about what we are doing to our wildlife species with our plastic pollution. So we have very solid estimates that by 2025, for every 3 pounds of fish, there will be 1 pound of plastics. It is, the beginning of the year 2023 here, and 2025 is right around the corner. So 3 to 1. There are other estimates indicating that by 2040, that number is going to be 1 to 1. So you can imagine what this is doing to our oceanic food webs, and also, what it's doing to human food sources as well as our wildlife species. This is a slide from the National Academies of Science. Early in 2021, the US Congress passed an act called the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. And one of the mandates contained in that act was that the National Academies perform a study of the United States contribution to oceanic plastic. And one of the things the National Academies folks found in their review of literature was basically how many species are already affected by plastic waste. And this is just sort of like the tangible effects. So you can see there on the left ingestion and on the right entanglement, and the relative proportion of species that are affected by either ingestion or entanglement of plastic waste in the oceans. This is not at all just an ocean problem, although that is probably the most famous case that we are all aware of. There's a lot of discussion about ocean plastics, but how does it get there? And more than 80% of it actually washes down from land. When I first got into this topic, I definitely thought that most of our ocean plastic would have come from things like illegal dumping, but that is not the case. The picture that you see here is a photo of a great blue heron taken in Knoxville, Tennessee, in their Greenway, I believe, in 2005. And so you can already see that even 18 years ago now, this was already a very pervasive problem on land and in our waterways. And so we have massive amounts of trash that aren't making it to landfills and are ending up ultimately in our waterways and then eventually in the ocean. So we have a situation where terrestrial wildlife are being affected as well as our oceanic wildlife. So as a lot of folks listening today will know, we have serious problems with our birds and other wildlife. They are almost all species are in decline. And there's a variety of reasons for that, of course. And we're not going to talk about all of them. I'll touch really briefly on them. But here's the State of the Birds report for 2022. And we have a situation where we're reaching a tipping point where we may not be able to reverse a lot of these declines of our birds that we love. So a lot of attention has been given to this topic in recent years. Folks might remember the paper that came out in the journal Science in late 2019 by Cornell University, the National Audubon Society, and others, showing, based on almost 60 years of data, that we've lost about 3 billion birds from the North American continent. This did get a lot of attention in the mainstream press as well as in the scientific literature. And I think that there is a growing awareness of this problem, partly because we are not just talking about species that, may be difficult to see, maybe rare, maybe in habitats that most humans don't normally get to necessarily. We're talking about some of our backyard birds as well. So even such a well-known species as the Baltimore oriole, we've lost 2 in 5 since 1970. So about 40%. Excuse me. This graphic right here shows a breakdown by habitat in the North American continent. And you can see that grassland birds have had the steepest declines of any habitat guild. So these are birds like the fairly well-known meadowlark. Lots of folks know meadowlark, not just folks that are bird watchers, excuse me, by hobby or by profession. And we've lost about 75% of our meadowlarks since 1970. So a colleague of mine that works in the artificial light realm said, gosh, it must not be very heartening working with birds, because what you are looking at as far as their populations are concerned is death by 1,000 cuts. There's so many things working against our birds and other wildlife at this point. So you can see some of them, some big ones there on the left-hand side: habitat loss, of course, collisions with buildings. As far as birds and small mammals and herps are concerned, outdoor cats, which are not native to North America, are the biggest cause of direct mortality. And then light pollution, which is very disorienting to all species, including ourselves. But we're going to talk about these things mainly today. So our wildlife are living in our garbage, and of course, the ingestion and entanglement it causes death and other problems. We have a situation where, because of our overuse of chemicals, we have toxicity in our air, in our water, and in our soil, and plastic is a big part of that. And of course, climate change and all of the myriad problems and declines that are associated with our changing climate and the climate chaos that is ensuing. And I've sort of highlighted these here because plastic is a either large contributor or the biggest player in these things that we're looking at here. So this is a graphic also put out by the folks that did the 3 billion bird study that we were looking at just now. And they have 7 simple actions to help birds. And I really, really love this. It's an excellent public outreach tool, very attractive graphics. And you can see that one of these 7 is use less plastic. And this is their graphic here. But I have a little bit of a tough time with this because, as we'll see, all of us as individuals just deciding that we're going to use less plastic isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. We need to do a little bit more than that. So the major problems with plastic: end-of-life pollution. I placed this in air quotes because plastic never really entirely breaks down. It will break into smaller and smaller particles, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But there is no real end of life for plastic. It's a significant contributor to climate change in terms of its extraction, production, and at times management at the waste level. It can have extremely toxic constituents that are harming both human health and almost certainly wildlife health as well. And this is a really tough problem to work on because it has been misrepresented to us for a very, very long time. So let's discuss how we got here, why this is allowed to continue when it's a very obvious, visible, and pervasive problem, and then some solutions and courses of action. So I would say the main takeaway that I hope you'd get today, underlying why this is a problem, why it continues, and why it is so detrimental, is that plastics are made from chemicals and fossil fuels. So some of those chemicals include some very, very toxic substances. Some of them haven't even really gone through any kinds of testing before being allowed into products, including into our food products. And then, of course, fossil fuels. These are the 2 most powerful industries on the planet. And frankly, they want us to keep buying their products. So the first plastics were made in the early 1900s, and bakelite, some folks might have heard of that. There are still bakelite items hanging around. You can find them on eBay and things. And it was made from formaldehyde and coal oil. And since then, plastic has come into virtually every aspect of our lives. It has been touted as a product of extreme convenience, making our lives a lot easier. This here is a spread from Life magazine in 1955 celebrating throwaway living. Instead of cleaning things and having that sort of inconvenience and reusing them, we can just use things once and we can throw them away. And so over the course of time, more and more products became made of plastic as opposed to, ceramic or glass or aluminum. And we as consumers over decades became more and more used to having this substance in all of the products that we buy, almost all of them. So for example, the average American in the year 1970 used about 30 pounds of plastic per year. By 2011, that number was 300 pounds of plastic per year. So since 1950, we've made about 9 billion tons of plastic, and half of that has been made since 2005. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So we have a situation where this is a substance that's designed at the molecular level to be not biodegradable. We don't want it to break down. It's meant to be durable, right? It is also designed to be disposable. A little more than half of it that we have now is designed to be disposable after just one use. So one use and you throw it away. About half was made since 2005. So if, like me, you've looked around and thought, gee, I really feel like there's a lot more plastic than there once was. Didn't we used to, have drinks more in cans and now they're all in plastic bottles, et cetera? That is not your imagination. Plastic production is definitely ramping up and has ramped up exponentially just in the last less than 20 years. And despite what we are often told, less than 9%, and it may be more to like 6 or 7%, has ever been recycled. So what do we think is going to happen when we have a substance that's incredibly pervasive? We buy it all the time. We use it in almost everything and it doesn't biodegrade. We're going to have situations like this one because we have nowhere to put all of this. So you can see here, this is a tiny bit complicated just because it's talking about all the different types of plastics. These are things that we often know as the numbers on our plastic products, right? But in total, we're looking at a situation where we have 300 million tons of plastic waste, at least, this is 2015 numbers, generated per year. And you can see how much that has gone up just since 1950. So what are we using all of this for? And I'm sorry to say that a lot of it is used for packaging. You can see the breakdown by sector here. So there are situations where it is genuinely a valuable substance. So medical uses, for example, cars, making cars lighter and therefore more fuel efficient. But as I heard Beyond Plastics founder Judith Enck say once, you're not seeing, medical equipment hanging from trees or floating down rivers. It's all of this single-use packaging that we have, and that is by far the most pervasive use, and it is growing as well. I like to leave these notes up here that are from my colleague Megan at Beyond Plastics, because I think this is quite funny. What is it used for? The craziest thing in the world, packaging. It's like buying a new coat and wearing it for 10 minutes and throwing it away. Totally absurd. So again, we have a situation where we have these products that are made from chemicals and fossil fuels. And I note that today, mostly the fossil fuels that we're using are a byproduct of hydrofracking. I'm sure folks here have heard quite a lot about fracking and fracked gas. A byproduct of that is ethane. It can be vented off at the site of fracking, or it can be used to make the building blocks of plastic. So ethane goes to a plant that is called an ethane cracker. It's kind of a funny name, but what it's referring to is that the molecule of ethane is cracked to make ethylene, which then becomes very small building blocks for our plastic products. So this is a view. You can see the date down there. This is when this was in construction in 2019. This is an ethane cracker plant on the banks of the Ohio River in Pennsylvania. And this is one that you may have heard about because it has received quite a lot of press. So you can see here this plant has been constructed to make nurdles. That's also kind of a funny name, but these are just small plastic round shapes that are used in building blocks to make more products. So there's a couple issues here, and one is, of course, what happens when we have any kinds of discharge or spill of these little tiny, they're about 5 millimeters wide, plastic nurdles. And you can see that as of October, this was about to come online and produce 1.6 million metric tons of these plastic pellets, these nurdles, a year. So another sort of issue with this plant is the air pollution that it is permitted to emit. And that is 2.2 million tons of carbon dioxide, 160 plus tons of particulate matter, and more than 500 tons of volatile organic compounds every year in this area. And that is actually a very typical rundown of the numbers as far as volatile compounds and CO2 that plants are permitted to emit each year. So speaking of nurdles, some folks might remember this shipwreck that happened in, I think it was May of 2021. This is the Express Pearl that sank off the coast of Sri Lanka. It was on fire for days. And one of the things that folks were most concerned about was the cargo that it was carrying, which were a couple million tons of plastic nurdles. This is what the beach on Sri Lanka looked like. After that, you can actually see the Express Pearl sort of burning away in the background there. And this is what happened to fish in the area, and of course other wildlife and sea creatures as well. And we have a beach here covered with nurdles that you can imagine is never, folks can never completely clean that up, though they are trying to do so. So we have a situation where both the production in terms of emissions and the product in terms of plastic are a very bad situation environmentally. The crux of the matter is that as we, when I say we, I mean the United States globally, people in general are really trying to move away from fossil fuels, right, as sources of energy, as sources of transportation. And we're trying to find better ways, renewable, cleaner, greener ways of meeting our energy and transportation needs. The industry is well aware of this, and they don't want to stop making product. And so as we transition to cleaner energy, they are planning to transition to making more and more products that incorporate fossil fuels and chemicals, so single-use plastics. This lovely graphic from The Story of Plastic by the Story of Stuff Project folks shows the proposed expansion by the petrochemical industry of new or expanded facilities. And it's actually more, it's a little over 330 now. And about 50 of these are in permitting, which means that they have the financing. And by 2050, industry expects and plans to have plastic manufacturing triple. So this sounds like some sort of a doomsday scenario that, alarmist wildlife ecologists might have made up, but it is published in reports by the American Chemistry Council. Basically, what this report here says, and it's available online, I have the PDF of it, is that because of the fracked gas boom, we have a lot of ethane. We can crack that ethane and make ethylene and make plastic nurdles and make all kinds of new plastic products, and that will be very, very profitable. So this is a recent report from Beyond Plastics talking about how it's the new coal. So the stats that I told you a bit earlier for that Shell cracker plant in Pennsylvania, the overall picture that we're looking at is if the industry build out continues as planned, it will have the greenhouse gas emission equivalent of about 290 coal-fired power plants. Now, just for comparison purposes, in 2019, we had 241 coal-fired power plants operating. As folks know, we are trying to close those down because they're such a dirty source of energy, right? And so we have a planned expansion of plastic production that would be the equivalent of reversing and expanding the work we have done to close down coal plants. So, climate change is something that often folks see as happening somewhere else, if they see it happening at all. This audience may not feel this way, but we often think of, fires in Australia or hurricanes in the Caribbean. But I would submit this, that we here in central Missouri and throughout the entire state of Missouri have been getting much more extreme weather, droughts and flooding, extreme flooding, that have become already disastrous for our state. So back to our friends, the birds. The National Audubon Society came out with some extensive reporting and statistical modeling between 2015 and 2018, huge project, telling us about birds and how their ranges are shifting due to climate change, and how they will shift even more. They will need to, as birds try and seek out the resources that they need to survive, and what those range shifts will mean. And if we do not slow down climate change, we are looking at about 75% of our North American bird species being very threatened, because of the range shifts that are needed, because of lack of resources, and because they're simply not going to be able to deal with such a drastic shift in climate and environment over the course of just a few decades. So at the same time, I do want folks to, sort of understand what we are up against, so to speak. This is a web page from the American Chemistry Council. You can find this online right now. And what they say is that plastics help us protect the environment by reducing waste, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and saving energy. Plastic packaging helps to dramatically extend the shelf life of fresh foods and beverages while allowing us to ship more product. So at a time that we have this explosion in production and explosion in waste, industry simply will not admit that and will not work on it. So a little bit on microplastics, which are typically defined as plastics that are less than 5 millimeters in width, going all the way down to nanoplastics, which are very, very small, such as that you see here. This is actually a microfiber, a plastic fiber, probably from clothing, that was captured within a snowflake. So again, these substances will break down into smaller pieces, but they do not ever go away. We're starting to see a lot of research come out of the medical field and the public health field, describing our own consumption via air, water, and food of microplastics. So we're starting to see more and more articles such as these. And a lot of these, the chemical constituents of a lot of these plastics are known carcinogens, they are known endocrine system disruptors. And so the fact that we are finding more and more of them, in our bodies is really concerning. I don't think anyone knows exactly how that is going to affect humans or wildlife either. So you can imagine that there's less research on wildlife physiology in terms of the effects of plastics and microplastics on our physiology to date, though there is some. We do know that microplastics are found all over the place. So it's not just that we're, as humans, ingesting these things as because of our food packaging. They're in air, water, and soil. Plants have been shown to uptake microplastics and absorb them. And there is some emerging wildlife research about the effects of plastics on our fellow creatures. So this is a relatively new study. You can see it says 2 weeks ago. That was 2 weeks from yesterday. That plastic nurdles will cause abnormalities in sea urchins, one of the important keystone species of our reef systems. More and more research has been emerging about birds as well. You can see on the left there, it's a study from the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, so a rehab facility. And researchers studied the GI tracts of birds that were brought in that either died, that were dead on arrival, or that died while at the facility. And you can see, if you look down in the text here, microplastics were found in the GI tracts in all examined species and all individual birds. The study on the right, recent study on tree swallows. So the researchers monitored nests, and particularly fecal sacs, and examined the contents of fecal sacs, and found that it didn't matter whether it was the swallows that they were studying that lived close to a wastewater outsource or lived in a conservation area. More than 80% of the fecal sacs they examined had evidence of microplastics. So those microplastics were in tree swallow nestlings. So we have a situation here where, it's not just unsightly things that look like this, where we have our wildlife and ourselves and our kids outdoors in situations where we're surrounded by plastic waste. It is also it's a full life cycle pollution problem, from extraction to production to ingestion, to this unsightly situation that we're seeing more and more everywhere. So before we speak about real solutions, I just want to talk very, very briefly about false solutions. Some folks might be familiar with this advertisement from industry. Keep America Beautiful is an industry coalition that basically says that as long as we, the consumer, just stop littering, everything will be okay. So, point being, for many decades, this is early 1970s, we as consumers have been told that really this is our problem, and that if we don't like aspects of it, whether it's the trash that we see in our waterways, or whether it's the air that we breathe near a production plant, that it's really on us to not litter and to stop using plastic if that's our choice. So more and more, however, we're seeing situations like this. I'm sure that you remember when supermarkets did not look like this. We did not have everything in plastic all the time. It is becoming more and more difficult to even make that false consumer choice, that it is on us and that it is our responsibility to not use as much plastic or dispose of our plastic properly. So one of the things, of course, that we're told consistently is that it's okay to use all of this as long as we recycle it. Wash out your containers and put them in the blue bins, and everything is going to be great. So, I said earlier that less than 9% of plastic ever made has been recycled. And coupled with that, we have a situation where, and this is probably a low estimate, 8 million tons of plastics are entering the ocean every single year. If recycling were working, this wouldn't be happening, right? I just wanted to briefly show a picture of, this is my truck at the river cleanup of our good friends, a fellow organization here in Missouri, Missouri River Relief. And the folks at Missouri River Relief do many river cleanups each year with armies of volunteers. And they've been doing this for more than 20 years. The picture you see there is just part, it's not even all, of the litter that they retrieved from the Missouri River in the course of a day. This is last fall. And the majority of this is plastic. And the majority of that is single-use plastic packaging. So while I am delighted that my friends at Missouri River Relief have jobs, they will always have them if we keep going the way that we're going and producing this much waste. So they've picked up, I believe it's 2 million tons over the years of trash from the Missouri River, and it is not slowing down. So I want to alert folks to a coalition called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And you can look this up online. And what this is an industry coalition that was formed for basically PR purposes. And there's some big players involved in this: Dow and 3M, the folks that make the building blocks of plastic, that make the plastic products, and that use the plastic products as packaging. And so their promise, given to much fanfare, was they're going to invest $1.5 billion in plastic cleanup projects across the globe. But at the same time, at exactly the same time, the member companies were investing more than 180 billion in producing more plastic. So we have a situation here where this is another wonderful graphic from the Story of Plastic movie. So we're in our house and we're trying to bail out an overflowing bathtub with a spoon, and we haven't even turned off the tap. So we're not going to be able to bail out the bathtub. We need to turn off the tap. We need to stop making so much plastic, particularly the single-use disposable plastic. Otherwise, excuse me, this is not going to stop. We're not going to stop seeing this. So some solutions and actions. Public outreach. This is, I cannot overstate the importance of this. I hope that folks will do everything from just simply speaking to their families and their household, to potentially speaking to managers at your local stores, or speaking to your local elected officials, but everyone in your community. We can all talk to other people and let them know about this problem. Let them know, whatever it is they care about. If they care about birds, tell them about birds. If they care about, their kids' health, which I think everyone does, let them know about that. So this is becoming such an issue of great public awareness that the folks at Environment for the Americas named World Migratory Bird Day in 2019 their plastic pollution theme. And this was a great way to reach out. This was one of the themes of a festival that we did in 2019 for outreach purposes. So we can all potentially get involved in supporting positive legislation. I'll talk a little bit about that. We can tell the corporations that are producing and using all of this packaging and wasteful single-use plastic to stop what they're doing. And we can engage in community science programs that provide data to decision makers. And I'll talk a tiny bit about each of these things. We just have a few minutes left. So one of the things that I find most important is trying to change public perception. So I think a lot of this really crept up on us without us really realizing it. I know that that's true of me. As I said earlier, all of a sudden I was like, gosh, there really is a lot more plastic than there was, just 10 years ago. And it turns out that wasn't in my imagination. I didn't just become more observant. So here's an example of that. Between 1996 and 2010, look at the amount of plastic bottles. And I think the perception is that we are getting better products or better quality, or something about these things, the way that they're packaged makes them better, but it doesn't. And these companies don't produce the water. They don't produce water. They produce plastic bottles. And so I think the more people that know that, the more we can kind of build some movement for change at all levels, not just at the individual consumer level, but all of these levels. So briefly, just to give you an idea of some legislation that has been proposed at the federal level, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. We're not going to go through all of these components here, but there are a lot of really, really important ones. some of the folks on Capitol Hill are very knowledgeable about this problem and trying to do something about it. So one of the things that I find most important about this piece of legislation is that it would put a pause on these new plastic production facilities until we have the chance to really study the impacts and update the regulations pertaining to plastic production. So my organization, the one that I'm with, Beyond Plastics, we have some great templates for legislation on the website that you can use at the local or state level, particularly. There's a lot of different pieces of legislation that are moving in various states, and you can learn all about that and become part of that effort. Different states are in very different places when it comes to working on plastic reduction. Some are far ahead of others. But this will give you an idea of some, basically a template of how to write a bill at the local or state level that will ban certain types of plastic, ones that are particularly unnecessary, particularly pervasive, and easily replaceable. So, and finally, I definitely encourage folks to look more into extended producer responsibility, also often called EPR. So in summary, this is basically a you make it, you take it mandate for companies, for corporations that make these products. So you can see the cycle here. So first of all, we want packaging to be reduced, and that which remains in production is free of toxins and is recyclable. So EPR legislation, when it is strong and done well, it involves corporate investment in infrastructure, as well as, at the very beginning, reduction in the original packaging. And so there are quite a lot of different EPR bills going around, but I do encourage you to look on the Beyond Plastics website for the basically latest and greatest, that is the strongest. It was done with a number of different partner organizations, and if implemented, it will go a long way towards solving our plastic problems. So corporate advocacy, as mentioned briefly, there's many examples and many ways to do this. So some folks have staged these plastic takebacks, which get a lot of media attention, essentially collecting all the plastic packaging that you get from your local store over a course of time and just bringing it back and saying, look, this is what your store and your products are putting into the environment. Here it is visually. You can talk to your stores. You can take action, whether it's on social media or via petitions, to tell plastic polluting corporations to stop. My understanding is that they really don't like negative social media attention. So that is a great way to kind of pile on. And then finally, community science. And this is something that, we as naturalists or bird watchers often engage in a variety of ways. And there are ways to do that that are helpful for ultimately reducing plastics. So I just want to draw your attention to a couple of them. We have the Nurdle Patrol. So those little plastic nurdles, this is essentially surveying along waterways, for nurdles, and reporting into the Nurdle Patrol. You can see that much of the work is concentrated on the coasts here, but there's definitely work going on up our rivers as well. So very easy to get involved in. Just go to nurdlepatrol.org. Another community science program is Break Free from Plastics brand audits. And so essentially you are collecting data on the brands of plastic that are found during a plastic cleanup. And so this is also an easy thing to do. It's, you need to coordinate or with someone who is doing a cleanup, or do your own cleanup, and then you do your audit and collect your data. But Break Free from Plastic provides some great training and data sheets and everything. So this is also a pretty easy thing to do. I wanted to mention, and those are just two examples, wanted to mention, this is, again, the National Academies of Science study that I referred to at the very beginning. And when they presented their results, this was their webinar where they allowed the public to hear about the results that they were presenting to Congress. They talked about the data that they incorporated into their study, and one of the pathways of data for them was this community-based science. So our data that we collect as community scientists, as amateur scientists, whether it's the Nurdle Patrol or whether it's the debris tracker that's here or whether it's Break Free from Plastic, our data are being taken into account by folks at the National Academy and decision makers. Just want to tell you about one win that came from folks doing many or all of these things. So the Nurdle Patrol and others took Formosa Plastics to court for all of their nurdle discharge pollution along the Texas coast. And the Nurdle Patrol will receive, or did, this is in 2019, $1 million as part of a $50 million settlement by Formosa Plastics. And this was the largest ever settlement of a Clean Water Act lawsuit filed by private citizens. So they took all their data and they got together as advocates and they took this to court and they won. And Formosa Plastics, as you can see in the second paragraph, also must stop releasing plastic waste from its plant, which is also a very good idea. So I invite you, we've talked about a lot of different great organizations, but you can also join us at Beyond Plastics. You can use that QR code right there, of course. There's also a couple different websites. You can subscribe and receive really good, really informative email updates. I'm not just saying that because I'm part of this organization. I use them to keep abreast of the news in the plastic world. And very good summaries, very good links, very well researched, et cetera. You can also look at beyondplastics.org ACT for a wide variety of different actions you can take, whether that's something that takes just a few minutes or if you want to get involved on a larger basis. Our founder, Judith Enck, has an outstanding online course that's through Bennington College. You can take it, you don't have to be a college student, you can take it just as an audit credit. And I've just taken it twice because it's so incredibly informative, and you will come out of it armed with all kinds of information with which you can speak with people anywhere at any level about plastic. So I would also encourage you, especially if you are either wanting to start a group of your own to work on this issue or are already part of any kinds of civic organization or community group or Audubon chapter or whatever, encourage you to either form a local group or become an affiliate of Beyond Plastics. So you can see this red pin right here, that's the Missouri River Bird Observatory. We already existed, so we became an affiliate of Beyond Plastics and work with them. Part of this local groups and affiliates programs are some excellent trainings on how to go about doing this, how to go about advocating for reduction in plastic. So in closing, I think that none of us, absolutely no one, wants to see a world like this. We want to see one more like this, right? And I think that we can do that, we can make that happen. But it's really important that we all get together and act and work to save the things out there that we love. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak this morning.